Katie, thank you very much indeed. I'll introduce myself now. I'm Lat Blaylock, and I'm editor of RE Today, and I'm your facilitator for this session this morning. I'd like to ask you all, please, a question as we begin. Where did you learn that you wanted to be anti-racist? I learned at school. I learned at Beach and Cliff Comprehensive, where I made friends with Bikram Sinha, the first person from a religion different to my own who was my friend. And he taught me how to have a dialogue about religion. And then when I was a young teacher in the 1980s in Leicester, my wonderful pupils, Sikhs and Muslims, Hindus and Christians from 30 different nations, all living together in Leicester, they taught me more about why I wanted to be an anti-racist. That's my question for you. Where did you learn that you wanted to be an anti-racist? I think most of us learn that in Britain. We learn it in school. And today, we've asked 4 people with fantastic experience and insight and academic credentials to introduce themselves in their presentations, which we're going to see in a couple of minutes' time. So I just want to say about the 4 of them as we begin that I am absolutely honoured. I would rather be doing nothing else this morning than listening in to Oxford Professor Anthony Reddie, to primary teacher Saima Saleh, to secondary teacher Alex Brown, and to Professor of Social Justice from the University of Cumbria, Saleh Elton-Chalcraft. These 4 speakers are illustrious in the way that the gospel writers are. Don't think of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse here. Have recorded for us 4 short talks. And the first part of our session today will be to listen to those. Then we'll have some live Q&A between our 4 presenters. And I'll just let them speak about what the others have said as we do that. And then we'll move on to having some engagement with your own questions. The chat bar is open all of the session for the whole hour, and I hope you'll have something to say in the chat bar. When you get the chance to ask a question, then you need to put question in capital letters, please, uppercase question, and the name of the person you want to address to Anthony or to Saima or to Alex or to Saleh. And we'll pass those questions. We won't have time for all of them, but I'll be selecting some that are popular and close to everybody's engagement. Those will be recorded and the chat will be available afterwards as well. This is just 1 hour. William Blake talks about an hour as eternity contracted to a span. I'm not sure we've got enough time here to talk about these important issues. So thank you, William Blake. Let's begin. Professor Anthony Reddie.
Yeah, hello, my name is Professor Anthony Reddie. I'm the director of the Oxford Centre for Religion and Culture, based at Regent's Park College, that's part of Oxford University. I'm also an extra honorary professor of theological ethics with the University of South Africa. My specialism is Black liberation theology and also decolonial education and post-colonial hermeneutics. I'm the editor of the International Journal of Black Theology, and I'm a prolific author. I've written and edited 19 books. The most recent one is the republished Is God Colorblind? That was first published in 2009 and republished again in 2020. What I would like to discuss really in the next few minutes is the significance of taking not just an anti-racist approach to religious education, but in particular a decolonial approach. One that essentially seeks to decenter whiteness and challenges the dominant epistemological framing of knowledge in terms of how knowledge is produced, by whom, and for what purpose. And how do we decenter, particularly whiteness, that sits at the heart of that has become the dominant way in which we understand how we see identities that are very much framed within the context of religious expression and religious identities across the world. A key book for me in this regard is one that I read many years ago when I was doing my PhD. And it was written by an African-American scholar called Robert E. Hood, and the book is called Must God Remain Greek? Must God Remain Greek? First published by Fortress Press in 19 1994, I believe. And in the book, what Hood does is he looks at the centering of religious expression, particularly in terms of Christianity, focused around European identities. And although he doesn't use the language of whiteness that becomes much more common now in recent times, and I'll speak a bit more about that shortly, he is, though, very clear about the way in which a particular imagination that was rooted in European expansion, in which at the heart of it is a trope of whiteness, this invisible set of identities that are the collective expression of people on the European landmass. So people don't perceive themselves as being white. There is intra-diversity, which again we'll come back to in a moment, between Catholics and Protestants, between different expressions of religious identity. However, when Europeans then begin to travel abroad and they go on their expansions and they meet people who don't look like them, the fundamental question then becomes, well, of course, who are we in relationship to that which is deemed as the other? And whiteness then becomes this way in which there is a gaze upon the other that seeks to categorize people into particular typologies, into particular cartographies. So space is very, very important in terms of how we construct notions of belonging and who gets to belong and who does not. And so I think a key thing that religious education must do is be at the heart of a decolonial enterprise that is beginning to reshape how we understand what it means to belong and the gaze upon the other. Therefore, to give a practical expression of that, it's a way in which oftentimes RE, as at its worst, of course at its best it doesn't do this, but at its worst, it simply becomes a way of essentializing particular frameworks of stereotyping the other. So, for example, I remember even when I did my doctorate in the late 90s, that was very much looking at an Afrocentric approach to understand the Christian faith, that at the time one still saw a way in which Christianity was presented as being de facto white. So other religious traditions were people of color. So Islam was Asian, and Judaism was white, Christianity was white, Sikhism and other of the great religions from the East were perceived as to be inhabited by people of color. What that did at a very, very stark sense was just to reinforce these very, very solidified monolithic forms of difference that never accounted for intra-diversity that exists within all religious traditions. So, for example, in Christianity, it is not simply a white religion. That may well be an expression of a particular understanding of the religio-cultural artifact of Anglicanism as the dominant church in England, particularly the Church of England, but actually even the Church of England itself is very diverse, particularly since the Windrush generation have come post-1948. Islam is very, very diverse. And of course, if you go to many of our major metropolitan conurbations, you will find people of African descent who are both converted into Islam as well as being part of a historic long trajectory of being within Islam, particularly in terms of North Africa. Ditto Judaism, ditto other religious traditions in which there is intra-diversity. And therefore, I think an important aspect of a decolonial approach and an anti-racist approach to religious education has to be this digging into intra-diversity in order to repudiate stark notions of essentialized discourse that end up stereotyping particular groups of people and put us into fixed monolithic boxes. An important way of doing that, therefore, is to ask the question, who is represented and how are they represented in this?
Hi, my name is Saima, and I've been teaching for 27 years. I'm head of RE at my school in Surrey, and I'm a member of the NATRE exec. Our aim is to develop and grow an anti-racist, racially literate culture, which allows children to be proud of who they are and all that they represent. I, like many BAME people, know only too well of the consequences of ignorance and intolerance and lack of racial literacy. As educators, it's time for us to step up. It's time to take action and make the change that is so desperately needed in order to save society, if we are to live peacefully and respectfully with people of all faiths, cultures and beliefs. But it shouldn't be down to people like me making a stance. The people in school who are in the best position to start making a difference are not BAME educators, but white staff, namely governors and head teachers. To talk about race and culture is empowering for children. It's important to weave anti-racist practice through everything that we do at school, not something that's just added on as a tick box activity. You can only be what you can see. We must be positive role models for our pupils. We need to start valuing the needs of everyone. In order to do this, we must educate ourselves. The leaders, the staff, and the students need to know why it's important to have anti-racist conversations. Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, and some people may not want to do it, but it's imperative that we do, otherwise change will never happen. So when we think about leadership, does school leadership reflect modern Britain? Does it reflect the communities that we live in? Does it reflect our pupils? If schools show that they value BAME teachers as leaders, they teach BAME pupils that they too are valued and have something to aspire to. We need to prepare our children to be global citizens. Our job is to prepare our pupils for life in a diverse world. So does our curriculum reflect this? We need to offer a curriculum which represents and values everyone in order to create confident learners. Can a child see themselves in their curriculum? What's the intent of our curriculum? What are our values? Are we valuing everyone? Do our pupils have race equity? Why must we just recognise Black people every October, otherwise known as Black History Month? Is this all Black people are worth, a token gesture that is meant to make everything all right for the rest of the year? Valuing the lives of Black people is not a tick box activity. My colour is not an annual occurrence. History must be taught as it happened, not as it was chosen to be portrayed. We need to help our pupils to understand how multi-ethnic Britain came about. Why don't we teach our pupils about the massive slave trade that took place in our country? It's uncomfortable and it's complicated and it's difficult. But if we don't confront it, then we continue to perpetuate the problem. What and who are we teaching our pupils about? Why these people? Could there be others? The Chartered College offers an anti-racist reading list, which offers further guidance on this. So rather than just focus on Black slavery and all that has gone wrong for Black people, why not focus on positive Black role models, positive Asian role models? This is going to help empower BAME children and give them a strong sense of self. So many cross-curricular links are obvious here: music, art, drama, English. We can use the disciplines of social science and theology to study the problem of racism. Over the span of the last year, I taught some of the anti-racist lessons written by Lat Blaylock to my Year 4 and my Year 6 pupils. I was absolutely bowled over by how engaged my pupils were in their learning, and they actually wanted to learn more. Using a range of sacred texts to explore messages of equality between faiths highlighted fairness and justice, values which are very clearly understood by children. Other resources that I use in the classroom are persona dolls, role play resources such as griddles or tavas that chapatis are cooked on, chopsticks, wooden cooking spoons. I use diverse representations in my images, such as images of Jesus where his skin colour may be black or brown. I use books to promote a cultural and social understanding of different ethnic groups. Children's books need to represent the world that we live in. When I model writing, I draw on my own background and I use Asian names and terms, which I believe helps to inspire my Asian pupils to take pride in themselves. Other quick wins are learn how to pronounce unfamiliar names and offer choices when it comes to seating. These steps may seem really small to us, but to children, they can be huge. All of our pupils must be empowered. They should be made to feel proud of their colour, their faiths, their cultures. We owe it to them. It's important for schools to have a strategic plan and a clear vision to tackle racism. Which conversations will you have with your SLT to bring about the change that is so desperately needed?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Brown. I am a secondary school PRS teacher. My academic background is in Black liberation theology and womanist theology, Islam within the Black American experience, and issues of social justice pertaining to gender, race, class, and education. And I also offer advisory and consultancy work regarding anti-racism and decolonialism within schools. And today I'm going to present a paper entitled Writing Towards an Anti-Racist RE Curriculum. Whilst it is essential for us to outline and explore what an anti-racist RE curriculum would explicitly entail, within this paper I seek to offer important considerations regarding a foundational aspect that is often overlooked: the meta-narrative of an anti-racist RE curriculum. The term meta-narrative refers to the epistemology, so the ways of deriving knowledge about a specific subject, but more to the point, knowledge about itself. Through engaging with this existential philosophy, we are able to revisit, analyze, critique, and complicate certain properties and the assumptive logic that has and continues to act as the foundation, chosen methods, form, and utility of our current RE curriculum. It is crucial to note that engaging in the meta-narrative does not in itself negate a position, rather it acts as a paradigmatic posture. So in essence, I wish to have a conversation about the conversation of creating an anti-racist RE curriculum. So it's as though I'm hovering above a conversation and commenting on its interplay. It is through this meta-narrative that we can truly begin to unearth and expose that which creates, perpetuates, and normalizes racist ideas, violence, dehumanization, and white supremacy. And I think it's really important that we're honest, we're open, and that we're explicit about this. And by white supremacy, I mean the following: white Anglo-Saxon, so European, cultural practices and beliefs, norms, languages, theological traditions, and interpretation of scripture, formulations of doctrine, and physical attributes being depicted as normal, universal, and the standard by which all others are judged. In doing so, white is positioned at the epicenter of humanity and consequently renders everything and everyone else, the other, but more to the point, inferior. This further accentuates the point made by anti-racist writer and activist Layla Saad. White supremacy is not the shark, it's the water. I further contend that at the heart of creating an authentic, rigorous, and progressively enduring anti-racist RE curriculum, 2 points must be acknowledged. The first is the harmful nature of the prevalent pedagogical lens that informs the RE curriculum. In order to create an anti-racist RE curriculum, we must acknowledge that we are working to dismantle our current RE curriculum and by extension wider curriculum that perpetuates racism and is deeply entrenched in colonialism. In order to counter this harmful reality, we must take a linear mapping, which will subsequently act as a form of decentering. We can achieve this through a multidisciplinary inquiry about the wider context. So, for instance, what was the socio-political climate at this particular point in history, domestically, globally, and geopolitically? By doing so, we develop a curriculum that is able to hold conversations about religious beliefs, practices, philosophies, and doctrine in juxtaposition to invasion and slavery, racism, colonialism, and empire, and other ongoing socio-political systems and realities that articulates the degradation of human life and acts as the foundation for modernity, but more to the point, Britain's geopolitical stature. This must be acknowledged, referenced, and explored both in theory and in practice, both inside and outside the classroom. We must cease to depict religion and religious life as an ahistorical, innocent discourse. Through this existential paradigm, we can explore the following questions. To what extent does the RE curriculum conceal and implicate itself within structures of violence, both spectacular and mundane? And if our current RE curriculum seeks to establish equality through ideas of sameness, in what ways do clear and often irreconcilable differences inscribe social, religious, and racial hierarchies? The second point I wish to make is the politics and a radical shift in power dynamics. Working towards an anti-racist RE curriculum is indeed a political act. The education system is an arena that is informed, dictated to, and regulated by policies, acts, and legislations. Therefore, the curriculum must be understood as a political manifestation of a wider institution. However, I do wish to stress the difference between the following. The curriculum being an integral part of a politicised space, and the curriculum, and by extension the classroom, being a site where our political biases and ideologies are placed at the helm of our practice. Whilst a radical shift in power dynamics will undoubtedly necessitate the loss of power and privilege for some, it will ultimately equate to a liberating and humanising curriculum for all. Consequently, I propose the following changes. Number one, all stakeholders within the education system must take direction, advice, and work in collaboration with anti-racist and decolonial scholars, activists, and groups, and existing practitioners who are much more equipped and knowledgeable about this area. And number two, anti-racist labour must not equate to free labour. In order to create such a curriculum, we will need to rely on the resources, time, and insight of anti-racist workers, who in most instances will not be white. We must ensure that schools and organisations are paying for their expertise as we would with any other service. Not doing so perpetuates racist power dynamics that objectifies and exploitatively extracts and consumes their labour. Such a disposition also sends the message, you should be grateful that we are even discussing this. Our mere acknowledgement is your payment. This anti-racist project must propel itself beyond the arena of the RE curriculum and into public life, as not doing so allows for the privileged and the deprived to return to their unequal material conditions in a society that still remains structurally intact. It must be birthed and cultivated within a holistic understanding that your liberation is bound in my liberation. Let us work together. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Saleh Elton-Chalcraft, and I'm a teacher educator and Professor of Social Justice in Education at the University of Cumbria. I was a primary and middle school teacher, leading RE, and I've worked in 3 universities as a teacher educator. I've authored articles and books, including Teaching RE Creatively by Routledge, and It's Not Just About Black and White, published by Trenton. In my talk, I want to explore teacher professionalism, not the what to teach, but the context and the how to teach anti-racist RE. I'd like us to firstly interrogate our underpinning values, the extent to which our own ethnicity and experiences have prepared us for teaching anti-racist RE. Secondly, I want us to confront any barriers we face in engaging in anti-racist RE, our conformity, inability to take risks, and possibly our white fragility. Thirdly, I'd like us to explore our professional development, moving out of our comfort zone and asking ourselves tough questions. For example, the extent to which we may be tokenistic and compliant or agents of the state. So number one, our positionality and underpinning values. White supremacy does exist. It isn't the shark, it's the water, as Said says in her book. To what extent do we really appreciate this and aware of the ethnicity and that of our own ethnicity and that of our learners? Do we acknowledge the supremacy of whiteness or ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist? Being colourblind, I treat them all the same, doesn't eradicate prejudice. It merely sweeps it under the carpet. Confronting inequality is challenging and uncomfortable. Opening our own eyes and the eyes of our learners to inequity can result in emotional responses: fear, anger, discomfort. For those who refuse to believe in white supremacy, What colour are plasters? Not black. And the book Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman flips the context, where black people are privileged and whites are the discriminated against. As a white middle-class woman, I am aware that I can never fully understand the discrimination faced by black, brown, BAME colleagues and learners. However, I can act as a white ally to ensure all voices are heard and BAME and white and BAME people are treated fairly and equitably. So number 2, the barriers. Acknowledging the existence of white Western supremacy is a challenge for some people and some teachers. And when black, brown or BAME folk talk, many white folk think they've got a chip on their shoulder. One of my black colleagues has experienced this. When she talks about race, she's seen as an irate black feminist, whereas when I talk, I'm afforded more respect. And we've seen it in reactions to the Black Lives Matter protesters. As a white woman, I feel very embarrassed about this situation, and emotional responses can abound when talking about race with our learners. Some people grow angry, others silent and dismissive, others reveal colour blindness, pretending there is no problem. And Robin DiAngelo has written about white fragility, the defensive moves that white people make when they're challenged racially. They feel anger, fear and guilt. And these are difficult to manage in the classroom because it involves us sticking our heads above the parapet, moving out of our comfort zones to engage our learners in authentic debates. Number 3, our professional development. I've been refining a typology of stances towards race equality teaching and developing our skills as culturally responsive teachers. The basic stance includes monoculturalist teachers who are tokenistic, compliant, shutting down any controversial debate because deep down they believe in the white supremacy, Western, patriarchal, male-dominated, heterosexual cultural norms. A few teachers are full of fear or act as agents of surveillance, making referrals to the security forces, albeit in a safeguarding context. But this positions learners, often Muslims, as either villains or victims. The developing stance is a colourblind teacher who glosses over differences to make everyone the same. They are the same as us, just a different colour, or having a different belief system. There is chilling, where the minority groups feel unable to articulate their views. There is a pretense of safe space, i.e. no prejudicial treatment, because the teacher is safely cocooned in their comfort zone, and minority voices feel othered if they articulate a different opinion. The improving stance, the preferable stance, is a highly reflective, critical teacher, aware of their own ethnicity and sufficiently brave to take moderated risks, engage their learners in frank, age-appropriate discussions about racism and its consequences. Now, many, not all, but many teachers of RE are nice people, conscientious people, the peacemakers of the classroom, with sunny dispositions. And it can be challenging to move out of our comfort zone and feel uncomfortable, to learn from mistakes and provide a safe space for all voices to be heard. But this is what we have to do. Thank you.
Colleagues, can I thank you, and can I thank you on behalf of this massive audience of teachers, and if you're visible there, you might like to show your appreciation of the richness of those 4 contributions to our consideration of what it's going to mean for us professionally to move towards being a more committed anti-racist religious education body of teachers. What a mind-blowing 4 sets of 6 minutes we've enjoyed there, and I have enjoyed. I'm fortunate because I've had the opportunity to see these presentations 2 or 3 times each now, and I'm suggesting to you, there's a lot in the chat that says, can we hear that again, please? I'm suggesting to you that you will go to those video records of our presentations this morning for some further attention to what has been said in detail, because each of them, we asked our speakers to speak for 6 minutes. They've each given us 12 or 15 minutes worth of thinking to do there. Do go back to those sessions. And may I thank, I'll thank you again at the end, but may I thank you, 4 members of the panel initially, for such fruitful and provocative presentations in this area. Tremendous. We'll spend the next few minutes. I have a question for each of the panelists. And Anthony, I'd like to start with you, if I may, please. Panelists can unmute, of course. We were hoping there that your academic presentation around Black theology would connect to our classroom situations. And you said that bad RE essentializes stereotypes. Yes, understood. I wonder if you could say to us, what do you think is the potential for good RE? What do you think good religious education can achieve in the context of our discussion this morning?
Yes, well, thank you. It's a great honour to be here. I think good RE does 2 things. One is it gives students an opportunity to develop very acute critical skills. Critical skills, perhaps maybe through the academic term, critical and hermeneutical skills that helps them to be able to decode text and to decode context. I guess one of the biggest challenges we've always had as humanity is about how we engage with difference. And when do you see difference as a positive attribute of being humanity? But actually, when is overly focused on difference actually a diversion from our common humanity? Now, there's no simple blueprint for doing that, but I think what good RE does, it gives children and young people a kind of literacy, a kind of critical insight to be able to make those types of interpretations around how we see difference and engage with difference. So that's the first thing I think critically is about critical thinking. Secondly, it is about helping them also then to see that we live in a contested world in which there are issues and challenges around power. And not talking about it doesn't make it go away. We know that that in a vacuum, that things don't simply just disappear, that what happens is the ignorance and the stereotyping of the other emerges in a vacuum. So therefore, what I think good RE also does is it just helps our children to say, well, you know, okay, we live in a world with contested narratives, with different perspectives. How do we help you to make critical judgments for yourself, not indoctrination, but for yourself to make those sense of who am I in relationship to the narratives that have shaped me and in relationship to the other, whoever the other is, and the narratives that shape them. So it's about interpretation and critical thinking.
Thank you so much, Anthony. That's tremendous to just start to digest those key points. Saima, I would like to come to you next, if I may, for an additional response. There's a thread running through what all 4 of the speakers have said about transparency, about the need to talk, and about making it visible that these issues are taken seriously in religious education. So you said, my colour is not an annual occurrence. Everybody's remembering that. But of course, Black History Month, which is an annual occurrence, is one of the ways that education has made space for some of that transparency. I wonder if you could say, what do you see as the next steps beyond Black History Month to normalise the transparency that we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, I think, we don't have a White History Month, and there's a reason why we don't have a White History Month, so I'll begin with that. Why just address Black things in 1 month and then say, right, we're okay, we've done it? We need to interweave everything that we do throughout the whole year, across all subjects. I know in my speech, I only mentioned a few things, but obviously there's so much more. And I think there needs to be a realization that colour is not something you can just address in it's not something that's in a little box and you just come to once a year and that's it. I think it's really, really important that subject leaders and senior management teams work together to look at the curriculum and see what can be done across the whole picture and not just within history or RE or English within that one bit of time. I think it's really important that we listen to pupil voice as well. listening to children and including children in everything that we do, I feel is really, really important. And I think it's about time that we include them in what we do. So although I've mentioned senior management teams, I do believe that we should take the children with us in this struggle. We need to start somewhere. And I think using great resources, having those conversations, having meetings, having your subject meetings, involving governors. There's a big, big picture, but we need to take everyone. We need to take the community. We need to take the parents. And we have to start somewhere. There are lots of starting points. For people who just do Black History Month, well, it's something. I guess it's better than nothing. But I think my main message would be it's not just something that you should do within 1 month and then be happy that you've done it.
So I'm guessing that you wouldn't be wanting to promote a Black Religious Education Month.
All year round, it should be all year. It should be the norm. I think that's what we're all saying, is it should become the norm, not something that's other or different.
Alex, may I turn to you next? And thank you so much for the phrase to which your presentation moved, that religious education should be a liberating and humanising curriculum for all. I thought that your remarks as you began about womanist and Black intersectionality were quite important for us. And I wonder if I could just ask you to unpack that a little bit, that the interconnectedness of oppression around, for instance, gender or sexuality, as well as around race and ethnicity, that seems to me something where RE teachers need to do careful thinking. What could you add to what you've already said about that, please? I'm just looking for Alex's tile, and I know that Alex has had some connection problems today. Can we hear you, Alex?
I might just need to there we go.
Alex, did you hear the question?
Yeah, I did hear the question.
Thank you. Okay.
Right. So I guess I can address your question in the sense that typically when the conversation, especially of Black History Month or a slightly more diverse curriculum comes into conversation, the sort of responses, we understand that Black history is important, we understand that racism is wrong, but we have other agendas, we have other issues that we need to address. So whilst we understand that this is important, we don't want to take away from, let's say, gender inequality or LGBTQ rights, for instance. But I think that in itself is quite a harmful trajectory to take. Because if we suggest that, for example, that talking about race in some way stopped us from talking about gender, we're actually suggesting that actually there's an archetype, there's a norm, and that race and gender have no with each other. We're also suggesting that all women are white, and they're not. Therefore, when we're having conversations about gender, race will have to play an integral part. We're also making the assumption that all women are middle class, and they're not. Therefore, when we're talking about gender, we also have to talk about class. We're also making the suggestion that all women are heterosexual, and they're not. Therefore, when we're talking about gender, we also need to speak about LGBTQ+ rights. So as an RE body, and in my humble opinion, as a society, we need to develop the maturity and the capacity to have multiple conversations at the same time and hold them in juxtaposition to one another. We need to understand that social issues intersect, so they cut across the identity of a society, but they also interlock. And I borrow that term from Black feminist Patricia H. Collins, in the sense that systems of oppression give life, prop up, and galvanate one another.
Thank you so much, Alex. Again, much to think about there, and that concept of interlocking is one that everybody's taking notes on just now. Sally, I'll turn to you in a moment, but just to give warning to the panelists, there's a question in the chat bar which we'll come back to, which is about terminology. And I think that's worth our attention. So there's been some discussion in the chat bar about the use of the acronym word BAME, or the spelt out version of that, Black and minority ethnic or minoritized communities or global majority. In 2 or 3 minutes, after I've just given a question for Sally, then perhaps we'll come back to that. And I'd be really interested to hear from each of the panel members about that. Before we go there, Sally, could I ask you, please, You've talked about there the position to which teachers might aspire. Teachers of religious education might aspire to be creative, critical teachers, aware of their own positionality, happy to face the challenges of anti-racism. You've given us some pointers to how teachers might begin to move towards that position from where we are, and being honest and transparent about where we are as we start. Could you say, what does that begin to look like when teachers have got that creative, critical awareness and that willingness to face the challenges? What does that begin to look like in terms of what we teach in RE?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's a matter, I think, of developing practice. So coming out of your comfort zone. And one of the things that both Said and also D'Angelo talk about is this idea of moving from comfort zone to a learning zone, and actually taking ownership of where we actually are and being honest with ourselves. And there's this idea of being a good guy or a bad guy, or sorry, guy was the wrong terminology there, good person or a bad person. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm anti-racist, I'm a good person. And this binary, I think, is unhelpful because it stops us from moving forward. So I think, yeah, you know, a lot of us in this environment here would probably say we're all anti-racist, you know, we're all teachers of RE, but I think even from where we're standing, we can move forward. This idea of growth mindset, we can all develop, we can all really search our innermost souls and think, are we really pushing the boundaries? So that's why I said, you know, about being a critical, reflective teacher. So it's pushing that boundary and thinking very deeply about, you know, am I, for me, as a white person, really appreciating the prejudice that Black, Brown, BAME, BME, ME people experience, and am I making sure I allow all voices to be heard?
Oh, thank you, Sally. Now, I'm not asking for an answer to the question, what is the correct terminology to use in anti-racist RE here, because that's in flux. But who would like to start from our panel, please, with a comment on that term BAME? Are we happy with that term, or how should we develop our language to speak accurately and justly about these issues around race and ethnicity? Who's first there? Thank you, Sally.
It's interesting, actually, because I've been having this very conversation with a network that I'm a part of. And again, as a white person, and I have to keep saying that because I think it's important. As a white person, I had to listen, and there were some Black, Brown, BAME, minority ethnic people in that anti-racist network, and they were saying the terminology should be decided by us, by Black and Brown people. So having said that, I will now be quiet.
Okay, who wants to go next, please?
Well, I don't mind speaking.
Thank you.
Personally, as a brown person, you know, I first of all, in an ideal world, I wouldn't have to be labelled. I think I'll say that first. We do recognise, we do need to recognise that there are people of different colours. And Sally, what you said about sameness and being colourblind in a classroom, it's really, really important for children to understand that they are different colours. A colleague of mine taught an anti-racist lesson a few months back, and a pupil, she had a complaint from one of her parents of a pupil in her class, and when it boiled down to it, it turned out the child was upset because she realised for the first time that she was Black and she was different to the other children, and she never realised that she was Black or different. She felt like she was white. And through this anti-racist lesson, all of a sudden, she realizes she's Black, and it's become an issue for the parents because the child's upset. So although we do need to recognize that we're all different colors. Personally, I don't like being put into this box and being called something with a label on it just because I've got brown skin. But recognizing that I am brown, BAME I can live with. It's an Americanism, but people of color or non-white. I think everyone's got a color, so people of color can be all of us. And non-white, well, non-white. I'm brown, which is not white. It's a tricky one, this one, because although you don't want to be labeled, we do need to appreciate and recognize that people are of different colors. But
Thank
personally, BAME, I have no problem with that as a brown person.
Anthony?
I don't have an ideal term. I can live with BAME, but I don't think it's great. I agree with Saima. The people of colour is okay, but then it implies that white doesn't have a colour, and sometimes it slips into being coloured, which is problematic. So that's an unhelpful similarity. I think the key thing for me is not to get distracted by then arguing over terminology when there are bigger issues around activism and substantive change around practice that we need to get involved with. Because I think sometimes what we have to always recognize that there is an existing status quo that doesn't want us to progress, and they will find any means to divert us in terms of not getting to much bigger substantive issues around what we teach, how we teach it, and in what ways we teach it. Which is not to say that language doesn't matter, it does matter, and therefore how we name things matter, but I always wanted to get that into proportion and not to be distracted by arguing over terminology and then missing much bigger issues that also need to be addressed.
Anthony, thank you. Alex, I'll turn to you, but I'll append another question to this. There's quite a few questions in the chat bar about RE in relation to the whole curriculum here. Teachers of RE saying we cannot do this alone. We need to integrate the anti-racist and decolonializing approaches with other subjects. I'd be really interested in your comments on terminology, on the word BAME, if you'd like, but also would you begin to open that one up for us, please? How can a whole curriculum approach help RE to do its part?
If I could start by addressing the previous question. So I actually don't particularly like or find much use in the term BAME. I think for similar reasons, it suggests that white is not a colour. It suggests that white is universal and that it's the norm, and it's not. Being white doesn't make you colourless. You are a colour. You're just not racialized. I think that's a really important point to stress. And I also think, secondly, the term BAME is just a homogenous label. So everyone who is not white British, so not just white, but white British. So technically a white European also counts as BAME because they're not part of the white British identity. And we all kind of are thrown into this melting pot, as it were, and we're seen as this homogenous group. And I think that by doing so, it doesn't allow for us to speak to our unique experiences, our unique history, but more to the point, our unique relationship with the state. And I also don't think it allows for us to talk about the complexities of our relationship as a BAME community. So for example, anti-Blackness, which is very deeply saturated within the South Asian community, for instance. I don't think terms such as BAMEs allows us to talk about the complexities of different relationships amongst different racial and cultural communities. So I think similar to the professor, I'm somewhat bereft of language with that regard, but I personally use the term Black, Brown, and other racialized groups. That's how I would address it.
Thank you. I don't know if you'd like to make a comment about the cross-curricular issue as well. There's clearly a decolonizing enterprise that needs to happen for the whole school, not just for RE.
I think, as I previously said in my paper, I think we need to take a linear mapping. And I think we need to ask a multitude of questions. And I think it's about engaging with the socio-political context and climate of that particular time. So I can talk about, for example, the Imago Day, and then hold that up in relation to, well, how was the Imago Day seen in the West? How was it seen in Africa? What did it mean to be created in the image of God while simultaneously being an enslaved person? And how actually the two aren't the same. Mm-hmm. And how to navigate my humanity whilst being seen as an in relation to someone who understands themselves as human, but more to the point, dictates that which is human. So if we can kind of take that linear mapping, remember the context in which all of this was said, in which it was created, and allow for departments to actually sit down and talk with each other, as opposed to where are we, your English, your history, then we can move forward. But I think it does require everyone to be at the table, as it were.
Thank you so much. I think that there's a case there for reflecting that debate about language to our pupils and sharing with pupils, even from quite a young primary age, why the terminology of this debate is so problematic. Children are often very good at getting a handle on that without fear or favour. Saleh, could I turn to you next? This question from the chat bar is aimed for you. You spoke about white allies in the anti-racist political struggle. What makes a good white ally? I'll ask the others that in a minute as well, but I'll start with you because you gave us the concept.
Yeah, I think what makes a good white ally is someone who is beginning to really understand the pain felt by Black, brown and other racialized groups, because I think that's a good term, Alex. I think really understand the pain and the anger and discrimination experienced by Black and brown and other racialized groups. So understanding and then action. And I think the action is really, really vital. And that action is dependent on what your professional context is. So if you're a classroom teacher, it means interacting with your group of learners and making sure they understand what this context is all about. And that can happen right the way through from early years. And it's interesting, you know, this mentioning, Saima mentioning her colleague who had a Black child in the class, that must mean then that I'm not being judgmental at all, but that must mean that Black child was not aware of her ethnicity. Now, for me, that's quite sad, actually. And it's interesting, you have to notice the difference in order for the difference not to be an issue or to be discriminated against. And Chris Gain talks about this in his paradox, where as an anti-racist teacher, as a white ally, we have to actually open the can of worms in order to address these issues. So I think being a white ally, you have to be very brave and put your head on the block and really go for it. But that bravery is nothing compared with the discrimination that Black, brown and other racialized groups might experience.
Thank you so much. Anthony, I have one more question from the chat for you, which is about the connections between Black theology and Catholic social teaching, and whether you see Catholic social teaching feeding in some useful conceptualizations to Black theology in 2020 and following.
Indeed, yes. I mean, there's a huge amount of there's a huge amount of conversions, I think, between the two. I think Catholic social teaching has always been essentially important in terms of looking at the social implications of faith and not just the abstractions and the spiritualization in which religion is, well, particularly Christianity, is often undertaken, particularly from a very evangelical perspective. I would add two quick things. Catholic social teaching has never historically addressed whiteness, and therefore I think that's one of the important addendums that Black theology brings that I think Catholic social teaching can learn from. The other is that I think that at the heart of liberation theologies is the centering of human experience and the inalienable belief in human liberation, and therefore I think one of the critiques one can make of Catholic social teaching is that it still comes under the auspices of a Catholic magisterium. And therefore, I think one of the things about ultimate freedom is that it has to be able to critique even the institutions that are sponsoring it at the same time. And therefore, I think Black theology is, in that regard, is much more heterogeneous because it's not subject to any particular authority. The authority lies in the experience of the oppressed and the marginalized who determine for themselves their freedom, not something that the magisterium or the Pope decrees to be okay. But that said, that's not to be unfair on Catholic social teaching. I think it has a huge amount to offer historically to all forms of liberation theology, and certainly I think Latin American liberation theology takes some of its development from Catholic social teaching that is well over 100 years old.
Thank you. I think that there's rich vein to develop in an understanding of Catholic social teaching for schools that are not Catholic as well. That's well done in our Catholic secondary schools, but let's all pay attention to that. Alex, could I turn to you one probably last time? We're in our last 8 minutes now. You gave this line in your speech that the RE curriculum is compromised with violence. And it's a shocking thing to hear it said, but thank you for making that case. How, recognising that the RE curriculum may be compromised with violence, the questioner asks, how can we begin to break free and reform from this compromise?
I think firstly, I'd say that we have to remember that the RE curriculum, of course, is a part of the sort of school, which is a part of the education institution. So this is one of many pillars within our society that, well, is implicated and conceals racist violence. I think that's the first thing to remember. I think it's important to also remember that traditional cultures are created by individuals, and those individuals, along with their cultures, their values and their norms, create houses. Those houses create institutions, and those institutions are what makes a society. So we can't live in a racist society, or we can't operate in a racist institution and not understand that there are racist policies or not know of any racist people. And I think that if we continue to separate the body from the existential space, then we continue to perpetuate a racist violence. And I think we need to be very honest, open and explicit. And I think regardless of the colour of your skin, we have all internalized white supremacy to some extent. So it's about acknowledging that, owning up to that, and then trying to unlearn it. So the anti-racism is the identifying, the calling out, and the navigating in that space. And the decolonizing process, in my opinion, is the reimagining and the redefining and the building something better, something liberating, something human.
Thank you so much. We come towards the end of our time, and I asked each of our speakers if they would like to issue, well, I called it a rallying call actually, if they'd like to give just a brief final thought to say, here we all are, hundreds and hundreds of teachers of RE, some of us black and from minority ethnic communities and in racialized groups, and some of us white and barely aware of it. But here we all are, spending our Sunday morning showing our willingness to do what we can in the context of religious education about racial injustice. So could I start with you, Saima? I feel like I haven't spoken to you for 7 minutes. What would you like to say as we come towards the end of our time?
Well, I'd like to go back to the thing about the white allies. I think it's really important that we all work on this together, and we do have white people helping to make a difference. Otherwise, we're seen as the brown or the black people who are on one. There they go again. If we leave them alone, they'll be quiet and it'll stop and it won't be uncomfortable anymore. This is really uncomfortable. It's really hard. It's not easy, but it's really, really important that we start having conversations and we start making a difference, and we start working with our senior management teams and our governors and our pupils and our teachers and the whole school community to start making a difference. We need to look within ourselves and see what differences we can make in our classrooms at the grassroots. And this is really cheesy, but it resonates so much with me. And I wanted to say these words because the first time I heard them, I cried. And anyone who listens to them now might feel a bit emotional, but I'm going to read them. These are the words from Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem that I think just summarize everything really. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And I'm going to finish with that. That's all I'm going to say.
Saleh.
Yeah, how to follow that. I think it's, don't worry about making mistakes. I think the curriculum that we've got at the moment is very much, you got to get it right, and you've got to get it right first time. And I just disagree with that. I think we learn more from the mistakes that we make. Not that it's a good thing to not go into things with your eyes open, but I think making mistakes learning from it and working with your class, with your group of learners or your senior leadership team, and having that relationship, that trusting relationship where you can move forward, and the honesty, I think, is my parting gift.
Anthony.
Yeah, I think all of us know that essentially the real change we need is systemic and structural. But in the end of the day, actually most of us will not have that level of power to bring about that change. And so what I want to offer are two quotes that I think emphasize the importance of what we do with our own agency. So the first comes from Gandhi, who says that we all should attempt to be the change you want to see in the world. Be the change you want to see in the world. And the second one actually comes from Desmond Tutu, who says, if you think you're too small to make a difference, then you've never shared a bed with a mosquito. And I think all of us, if we take that analogy, not understanding the problematic nature of it in a literal sense, in terms of malaria, if we think of the body, a white body, as a white male patriarchal body as being representative of power, then actually all of us actually can be a mosquito. And just very quickly, for anyone who's ever shared a room with a mosquito, you know that long before it ever bites you, the fact is, just the fact that you know it's there means that you never sleep comfortably. And at the very least, what we can be is to be signs of dissent and a subversive presence that says that injustice does not sleep quietly and peacefully whilst we are buzzing around trying to make a difference.
And Alex?
I'd just like to end with two quotes. So the first is from the American philosopher Cornel West. He said it within the American context, but I wish to recontextualize it to fit the British context. When Britain catches a cold, black and brown people catch the flu. And that speaks to the intensity of our reality. And it also speaks to the racist infrastructure and systems that essentially creates a racist nation. And the second is a quote by the Black feminist Audre Lorde, who says, when we fail to see truth and wisdom in the lived experience of others, we rob ourselves of ourselves and each other.
Now it falls to me to thank our panel this morning, and I have not time to put into words my gratitude to them, but the richness of the discourse that they've introduced to us, the quality of their engagement with our reality as teachers of religious education have been utterly superb. Do whatever you do now, clap with your hands, wave with your hands, put your clap symbol on, give them a thumbs up, write a note in the chat bar that says what you got, what your takeaway was from our session this morning. Strictly RE has a few years of history behind it now. One of our purposes in running this conference every year is to say to teachers, you matter and you're valued and we love you. But actually we have never been happy that Strictly RE should only be affirming to the teacher. We have always had the ambition that it would challenge you, the teacher, to be your own best self, to be your own best teacher in every class you face, in every classroom you run. The challenges are visibly clear from our work together this morning. Open the can of worms, be brave, be transparent, take the messages of justice that have come to us from our panelists, make them your own for your pupils. There's some change to be made there, colleagues. And I thank you, as well as our panel of speakers this morning, for your time on a Sunday morning. Can I give you 3 reminders as the session comes to a close? The first is that for the next half hour, our exhibitors would love to see you. Go into the exhibition area, pick an exhibitor you've not talked to, click right through, and they're ready to meet you and to talk to you, each on their own Zoom. The second is that our seminars start in 30 minutes at 11:30. You've all got nice clear click-throughs to those in your email, and I hope you find your way to those easily and smoothly. And the third is that the next time we meet as whole conference is at 3:30 this afternoon with Richard Quay, Her Majesty's Specialist Inspector at Ofsted, who will speak about religious education and inspection for us. That's the only session of conference which cannot be recorded. And that means that if you want to hear Richard, you need to hear him live. That's if you've got any brain space left after the last hour. Thank you so much. And you're free to go for that cup of coffee, piece of cake, walk around the garden, whatever you need before it all starts up again at 11:30. Thank you very much.